When a prison guard was found unconscious beside a jammed electrical panel, officials blamed inmate sabotage. What they didn't know was that deep beneath Ironwood Prison, buried inside a broken HVAC duct, sat a blueprint, not for escape, but for exposure. Jamal Harris, a wrongfully convicted engineer, had been quietly building the most dangerous weapon the system had ever seen: the truth. With nothing but scraps, equations, and grit, he turned prison walls into proof. And when one of his coded letters leaked to a journalist, the world finally started listening. But now someone inside wants him silenced before his map hits the courtroom, and time is running out. Stay with us, because this isn't just a prison story. It's a war between power and proof. And Jamal, he's running to rewrite the rules. Jamal Harris had always believed that if you followed the rules, life would be fair. He studied hard, kept to himself, and worked long nights designing bridges and tunnels. He was one of the youngest black engineers in the city, maybe even the whole state. His mother kept his newspaper articles taped to the fridge. He had just finished a design that would bring clean water to a poor neighborhood when the knock came at the door. It wasn't a friendly knock. Red and blue lights flashed through the blinds. Before Jamal could even open his mouth, officers were inside. They pushed him to the floor, cuffed his hands tight. He kept asking what he did wrong, but no one would answer. At the station, he saw a photo of a man robbing a corner store. The blurry image showed a tall black man in a hoodie. That was it. No fingerprints. No video that showed a face. Just a witness who thought it might have been Jamal. "But I wasn't even there," he said again and again. No one seemed to care. In court, the jury barely looked at him. His public defender mumbled through the case. The prosecutor called Jamal cold and calculated, just because he spoke clearly and didn't cry. His clean record, his college degree, his designs, they didn't matter. Not here. When the judge said 20 years, Jamal blinked. He thought maybe he'd heard wrong. But the cold click of the gavel told him it was real. 20 years. For something he didn't do. As they led him away, he didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just looked down at his hands. They had built bridges. Now they were locked in chains. Ironwood State Prison wasn't just old. It felt angry. The stone walls sweated in the heat and groaned in the cold. The metal bars creaked like they were tired of being metal. The air smelled like bleach, and something Jamal couldn't name. It clung to his clothes and skin. He hadn't been there 5 minutes, and already he felt smaller. A guard with a face like stone barked at him to keep moving. Jamal didn't ask questions. He just watched. He noticed the camera above the hallway. It was pointing at the floor. Broken. No one seemed to care. He passed a crack in the ceiling, dripping into a rusty bucket. The bucket was overflowing. "Inmate 42,891, someone called. That was Jamal now. Not Mr. Harris. Not Jamal. Just a number. He was shoved into a narrow cell with a bunk bed, peeling paint, and a toilet that barely flushed. His cellmate, a quiet older man with tired eyes, didn't speak. He just nodded once and turned away. The silence was heavier than the bars. That night, Jamal didn't sleep. He listened. A scream echoed down the hall. Not a shout, a real scream. No one came. A loud clang. Someone crying. Then silence again. This place didn't just hold people, it erased them. The next morning, Jamal was assigned to kitchen duty. The food was watery, gray, and smelled like cardboard. He noticed the cooks had to serve twice as many people with half the help. One inmate had a deep cut on his hand. No bandage, no break, just blood on the tray. Everywhere Jamal looked, there were problems. Big ones, leaks, rotting floors, guards yelling threats, files left out. No one checking anything. And slowly, quietly, something inside Jamal began to click. Not with fear, but with purpose. He wasn't going to run from this place. He was going to expose it. Jamal kept his head down, but his mind was racing. While other inmates played cards or stared at the ceiling, Jamal observed not just people, but patterns. He noticed how the hallway lights flickered exactly 3 times before shutting off. He counted how long the guards took between rounds. 8 minutes during lunch, 10 at night. One guard always left a key ring hanging a little too low. Another always nodded off during his midnight shift. Jamal wasn't trying to escape. He was gathering information. In another life, he'd spent hours at a drafting table, designing bridges and transportation systems. Now he studied cracked floors and rusted bolts with the same quiet intensity. He wasn't sure why yet, but he wrote it all down anyway. He kept his notes hidden in old math books from the library, disguised as scribbled equations. No one checked, no one cared. At night, when everything was quiet, Jamal would lie on his bunk and replay the day like a puzzle. The squeaky gate near cell block C, the broken window in the east hallway, the vent in the laundry room that nobody seemed to notice. His cellmate, Ramon, eventually broke the silence. "What are you doing, man? Planning a way out?" Jamal looked over, calm. "Number, I'm planning a way in." Ramon blinked. "In? To where?" Jamal smiled faintly. "The truth. The part no one sees." It wasn't about freedom, not yet. Jamal wanted proof, real, undeniable proof of how broken the prison was. He wanted the public to see what happened behind these walls, not through stories, but through evidence no one could ignore. He didn't have a wrench or a hammer or even a pen of his own, but he had something stronger. He had his mind. Jamal kept his head down, but his mind was racing. While other inmates played cards or stared at the ceiling, Jamal observed, not just people, but patterns. He noticed how the hallway lights flickered exactly 3 times before shutting off. He counted how long the guards took between rounds. 8 minutes during lunch, 10 at night. One guard always left a key ring hanging a little too low. Another always nodded off during his midnight shift. Jamal wasn't trying to escape. He was gathering information. In another life, he'd spent hours at a drafting table, designing bridges and transportation systems. Now he studied cracked floors and rusted bolts with the same quiet intensity. He wasn't sure why yet, but he wrote it all down anyway. He kept his notes hidden in old math books from the library, disguised as scribbled equations. No one checked, no one cared. At night, when everything was quiet, Jamal would lie on his bunk and replay the day like a puzzle. The squeaky gate near cell block C, the broken window in the east hallway, the vent in the laundry room that nobody seemed to notice. His cellmate, Ramon, eventually broke the silence. "What are you doing, man? Planning a way out?" Jamal looked over, calm. "Number, I'm planning a way in." Ramon blinked. "In? To where?" Jamal smiled faintly. "The truth. The part no one sees." It wasn't about freedom, not yet. Jamal wanted proof, real, undeniable proof of how broken the prison was. He wanted the public to see what happened behind these walls, not through stories, but through evidence no one could ignore. He didn't have a wrench or a hammer or even a pen of his own, but he had something stronger. He had his mind. Jamal's eyes burned from hours of studying the prison's layout. The pages of his makeshift notebook were filled with diagrams, angles, measurements, observations. He sketched the cracks in the walls, the broken pipes, the places where the guards were most likely to be distracted. He was turning Ironwood Prison into a map, but it wasn't a map to escape. It was a map to reveal. He didn't even know where to start. Every corner of Ironwood was full of secrets. The showers had faulty drains that turned into slip hazards. The laundry room was filled with mold, but no one cared enough to fix it. There was a hallway where the lights never worked, and in the dark, anything could happen. Jamal knew he needed something more than just his notes. He needed proof, something to show the outside world what was really going on inside. That's when he found it, a scrap of paper tucked into an old engineering book in the prison library. It was a letter from another inmate, hidden for who knows how long. It detailed a system of illegal punishments, beatings that were covered up by the guards, forced labor without pay, inmates who disappeared after being sent to solitary. Jamal felt his chest tighten. This was real. This wasn't just bad conditions. This was cruelty. But what could he do with this? He wasn't allowed to write outside the prison. He couldn't send anything out. But then it hit him. He could encode it. Use the skills he'd honed in engineering to hide the truth in plain sight. He started to work with numbers. his old friends. He began to create puzzles. Every figure, every formula he wrote told part of the story. His plan was simple: smuggle out the truth hidden in math. No one would be able to ignore it once they saw it. It wouldn't be long before the world knew. Jamal didn't need tools to dig a tunnel. He just needed his mind. The idea came to him one afternoon as he watched the guards shuffle down the hall, bored and tired. There was something about their routine, their indifference to the state of the prison, that clicked in Jamal's brain. The broken locks, the leaking pipes, the areas where the walls were thin, all of it came together. It wasn't about escaping himself. He had no intention of running, but he knew what would happen if he showed just how easy it would be for anyone to escape. The guards would panic. They would have no choice but to fix the prison, no choice but to cover their mistakes. Jamal wasn't just going to expose the conditions from the inside. He was going to make the system work against itself. He started small, using the bits of broken metal and scrap wood that found their way into the corners of the prison. He gathered old tools from the workshops where he worked, things others didn't notice. The guards never checked closely. He was just another inmate with a broom and a mop. Night after night, he worked in secret. He dug a small tunnel behind the cell's cracked walls. It was narrow, too tight for any real escape. But that wasn't the point. The tunnel led straight into the warden's office. It was perfect. And the best part? No one would ever suspect it was built by an inmate. Jamal was careful. He kept it hidden. He made sure the guards saw only what he wanted them to see. When the day finally came, Jamal left the tunnel unfinished, a trap. The guards would find it. They'd follow it, and it would lead them right to the heart of the prison's corruption. He wasn't planning to escape. He was planning to expose the truth. It was supposed to be a routine search. The guards had no idea what they were walking into. Jamal had planned everything to the smallest detail. He made sure the tunnel led right under the warden's desk, straight to the floorboards. He even left a trail of small, unimportant items: scrap paper, old pens, and a few broken bits of metal. It was meant to look like an accidental discovery. But when the guards pulled back the floorboards, they didn't find junk. They found the beginning of a story. Inside the hidden space, they found Jamal's notes, diagrams, and a detailed map of the prison. It wasn't just a tunnel, it was a blueprint. Every cracked wall, every broken camera, every place where something went wrong was marked on that map. The guards didn't know what to do with it at first. They had no way of understanding what they were looking at. They just knew one thing: it wasn't just a tunnel. The next morning, the prison was swarmed with reporters, cameras flashing as investigators arrived. News outlets pounced on the story. "Inmate creates underground map to expose prison system," shouted one headline. Another read, "Engineer incarcerated for crime. He didn't commit becomes symbol of injustice." The media attention was massive. Jamal's name spread across the country, and with it, the evidence of what life inside Ironwood was really like. Experts came forward to confirm what everyone had suspected. The prison was a disaster waiting to happen, but now there was proof. Real proof. The public couldn't ignore it. Families of other inmates came forward, demanding justice. They spoke about the mistreatment, the cruelty. They pointed at Jamal's map as evidence. It wasn't just a man's story, it was a movement. And Jamal? He was still locked behind bars, but now his voice was louder than ever. Jamal never imagined that being locked up would make his voice carry further than it ever had before. When the story broke, it didn't just grab attention, it ignited a fire. People across the nation demanded answers. The media followed every twist, every revelation. But it was Jamal's words, smuggled from his cell, that kept the story alive. Late one night, in the quiet of his small cell, Jamal wrote. He didn't have much, just a few scraps of paper and a half-chewed pencil. But he had something bigger, the truth. His letter wasn't about his innocence. It wasn't about him at all, really. It was about everything else. The system, the guards, the lies that kept people like him locked away. The truth he'd discovered, mapped, and exposed. He had to make sure it didn't get buried. Jamal wrote, using the codes and puzzles he'd created to make sure his message could be smuggled past the guards. He hid his words within equations, made them look like math problems to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. The letter went out in small pieces, hidden in laundry, tucked into books, slipped into envelopes. Each piece told a story, each puzzle a piece of a bigger picture. When the letter finally made its way to the outside, it was everything Jamal wanted to say, but couldn't say aloud. It was a call for justice, for change, for an end to the cruelty he'd witnessed every day. He described the beatings, the forced labor, the constant threat of violence. He wrote about the lies that had been told, the reports that had been covered up, and the broken system that kept innocent people trapped. The letter went viral. It was read by thousands, shared by millions. And Jamal? He was still behind bars, but now his voice was louder than ever. Jamal watched the news from his cell as the country began to tremble under the weight of his words. The protests had started small, just a few families outside Ironwood, holding signs and shouting slogans. But as the media picked up the story, the calls for justice grew louder. Soon it wasn't just a local issue, it was a national crisis. News anchors spoke Jamal's name like it was a mantra, the story spreading across every channel. "Prison corruption exposed," they shouted. "Whistleblower reveals shocking abuse." Everyone knew the story now. Everyone knew the truth. The public demanded answers, and the government had no choice but to respond. In Washington, lawmakers scrambled to react. The Senate convened an emergency session. Reporters crowded the steps of the Capitol, waiting for anything they could get. Jamal's story had reached the highest levels of government. His maps and letters were being read in Congress, dissected piece by piece. Investigators flooded Ironwood, tearing through every document, every record, every piece of evidence. They found what Jamal had already known. The system was broken. Inmates were being mistreated, abused, and silenced. It wasn't just Ironwood. It was happening in prisons across the nation. The storm hit the Capitol like a thunderclap. Lawmakers stood at the podium, debating the prison system's flaws, arguing over the best way to fix it. Some called for immediate reforms. Others demanded heads to roll. The whole country seemed to hold its breath as the tension built. Every news outlet was watching, waiting for the moment the government would be forced to act. And in the middle of it all, Jamal sat in his cell, calm and still. He wasn't fighting for fame. He wasn't fighting for freedom. He was fighting for something bigger. He had always believed that a mind could change the world, and now the world was starting to listen. The days bled into one another as Jamal sat in his cell, waiting. He had done what he could. The world had seen the cracks in the system. Now it was up to others to fix them. But that didn't mean he was free from the weight of what had happened. The prison was quieter now, tense like the calm before a storm. Guards whispered, the warden's office door was always closed, and Jamal couldn't help but wonder how much of his success had rattled their carefully controlled world. Outside, things were moving fast. The pressure was on. The hearings were televised, the protesters louder, the media relentless. One morning, the prison buzzed with news that the Department of Justice was launching a full-scale investigation into the conditions Jamal had uncovered. Ironwood was under the microscope, and the world was watching. But as the tension grew, so did the silence from Jamal's own side. His family had been interviewed by reporters, but there was no word from his lawyer. No calls, no progress on his own case. He had become a symbol, a martyr, but not a man with a future. It wasn't until the morning of the scheduled Senate vote that the breakthrough came. Jamal sat alone in the cafeteria, eating the blandest meal they served, a tray of mushy vegetables and tasteless bread. He was staring at the floor, lost in thought, when a guard approached him. No words, just a sharp gesture, a quick nod toward the door. Jamal stood, heart pounding. Was this it? Were they taking him to solitary? But instead of a cell, they led him to the warden's office. His lawyer was there, along with a few government officials. They had a proposition. Jamal was about to hear the words he never thought would come. "Jamal Harris," the lawyer began, "you've been granted a new trial. Your case has been reopened. The walls that had once seemed so high now felt like they were crumbling. Jamal couldn't believe it. The words echoed in his mind long after the lawyer had finished speaking, after the guards had escorted him out of the warden's office. Your case has been reopened. For a moment, it didn't feel real. He had spent so many years, locked behind these walls, resigned to the thought that justice would never find him. That everything he had done, everything he had risked, was for nothing. But now there was a chance, a real chance. The trial was set for just a few weeks later. Jamal's supporters flooded the courthouse, reporters gathering outside, cameras ready to capture the moment. His family, once separated by distance and time, reunited in the crowd. They had always believed in him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. Inside the courtroom, it was tense, the air thick with anticipation. The prosecution had nothing to say. No evidence, no reason for Jamal's wrongful imprisonment. His lawyer, backed by the public outcry and the evidence he had uncovered, stood tall, presenting the facts. They spoke about the mistakes in the case, the overlooked evidence, the wrongful conviction. But it wasn't just about Jamal's freedom. It was about the larger story. It was about the corruption, the abuse, and the systemic injustice that had been allowed to thrive for so long. The judge didn't need much time to deliberate. He slammed his gavel, the sound sharp and final. Not guilty. The word fell like a weight, but it wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Jamal stood there, free at last, but his mind was already racing ahead. He wasn't just going to leave. He wasn't just going to walk out of the prison doors and disappear. He had promised the world he would fight for something bigger. Jamal Harris wasn't just free, he was a symbol of change, and the battle for justice had only just begun.